Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, here we are in the middle of the local election campaigns around the country, although you wouldn't know it necessarily because obviously there's very little that anyone can do in these restrictions with COVID and everything. But anyway, I'm delighted, obviously, that we have got in London a mayoral race, and I'm delighted to welcome back David Kurten, Assembly Member in London, who is leader of the Heritage Party and also standing for the mayoralty this time. David, thanks. It's good to see you again.
Really good to see you too.
When you were last here, it was for the Heritage Party just launched. How's that going?
It's going really well, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, from nothing, we've got a few hundred members and more volunteers and donors and stuff. And so it's wonderful. There's a lot of energy around the party. And I think our message is resonating in London and across the country as well. So it's fantastic.
So actually, you are going across the country, are you?
Yeah, so I mean, our main campaign is here in London. So I'm standing for the mayor and also the Assembly. And I announced that when I was still an independent candidate, actually last January. I announced that, but we've also got a number of candidates standing in local elections in the counties and so on around England. So everywhere from Cumbria to Kent and Devon to Hartlepool, we've got candidates, not everywhere, but in selected seats.
What does it mean you can do? I mean, given, as I said, that we've got these restrictions about meeting and all of this. So what actually have you managed to do? What can candidates do at the moment?
Oh, it's a very strange campaign. It's not like anything I've known before, because up until the 8th of March, they actually said, the government said, you're not even allowed to put leaflets through doors and everything had to be online. So I've moved online. We're doing a lot of stuff under the surface, and, you know, in Facebook and Facebook groups and Telegram and things like that, putting out videos and graphics and lots of things like that to spread the word around. And I'm doing lots of interviews like I'm with you today. I've just done another one this morning with another TV channel as well, but nothing really mainstream. I think the mainstream media have tended to completely ignore myself and the Heritage Party up to now. Maybe they don't like our message because we speak common sense, you know. We resonate with the silent majority of the country, which is completely different to, you know, what you've got in the established political parties. So I think we're not really getting much traction in the woke mainstream, if you like, but a lot of, you know, other channels and you know, free speech media, I call it, is sort of a nice term. They're very interested in talking to me and talking to the Heritage Party. So doing a lot of interviews like that, putting them out, and they're all going all over the place in various groups. So that's very exciting, and that's how the word's getting around.
I think it's just my perception that, because obviously I stood, you know, five years ago. We were doing it 5 years ago this very week. But it's my perception that the mainstream media is not covering it very much anyway. Is that, you know, not compared to last time?
Doesn't seem so. I mean, last time there were a couple of big hustings, and that was just in the April election period, and there were other hustings beforehand. And I know there was one in London between just the Labour and the Tory candidates, but it only was 20 minutes, and I only found out about it a few hours before it happened. I don't think there was much interest in it. They didn't seem to say much different to each other anyway. So, but I haven't been invited to any mainstream media hustings at all. I haven't heard of them. I assume there'll be one or two, but I don't know about them. But doesn't seem to be, you know, too much coverage. I mean, you think that it would be sort of wall-to-wall coverage of like the London elections, because it's a huge thing coming up in May that's going to be very, very important for the future of the city for the next 3-year term. But there, you know, there's been a little bit, but not much.
Yes. When you sort of look at the state of it is at the moment, obviously, you know, no one is unassailable, but Sadiq Khans seems to be streets ahead, like 26 points, and yet everyone's saying this is terrible, mate. You know, he's done nothing on housing, he's been terrible on crime, all of this stuff. How and why do you think he would be so far ahead?
It's a mystery to me, because I know a lot of people. I mean, for example, a lot of taxi drivers. You and I in the Assembly worked with taxi drivers for years and years and supported the taxi trade. And a lot of them say, we voted for Sadiq Khan last time because he promised a renaissance in the taxi trade, but has completely let them down. And now, they're looking to vote for someone else, me or someone else. And that's not reflected in the polls. And they seem to have stayed static with Sadiq Khan on about 50% and the Tory candidate on about 25%.
I love the way you keep saying the Tory candidate. Yes, that's quite right. The Tory candidate.
Indeed. But I think that's what most people actually know him as, because he's not very visible. But this is what the polls say. But, we've had a history over the last 4 or 5 years of polls being completely inaccurate on Brexit, on the American elections in 2016, on the UK elections in 2017, 2019. They gave the wrong result before the actual day. So I wouldn't be surprised if the polls that we're seeing here are giving the wrong result of what's going to happen in London as well. I mean, it is going to be difficult to knock Sadiq Khan off his little chair there that he sits on, but I'm going to try and do it. But there's a lot of people peeling off from him at the moment. I think a lot of people don't like his absolute commitment to the woke agenda. He's become so woke and following the whole Black Lives Matter agenda. He's with this diversity commission, and I think that's, a lot of people are very, very worried about what he's going to do there. And I know you've put a lot of work into that and tried to expose what he's doing.
I should explain, actually, that just in case, when David says we've done a lot, we've been working together on the London Assembly, you see, for the past 5 years or so. I'm bowing out, and David obviously is, standing for mayor. Got a new party. That's the background to it. Actually, on that front, we have this mayor's question time, don't we? And at the last one, you made a point to him. I wonder if you could tell us again what it was, because it brought the wrath of not the Tories, they stayed quiet, but all the others kind of went for you, didn't they? And he went for you.
It was an extraordinary session, that was. In the mayor's question time, we get about 6 minutes each to question him. It was the last session of the term, and I asked him about a tweet that he'd put out where he said something like, trans men are men, trans women are women, non-binary people are non-binary. And I said to the mayor, well, look, you said this, what does it actually mean? And I said, can you explain this? Do you actually think that some women have male reproductive organs? And he wouldn't answer the question. He said, you're in danger of conflating sex with gender, which is another kind of meaningless statement. So I asked him again, and then he said, well, you're in danger of stirring up hatred or something like that. And then a Labour person, a Labour Assembly member, no, it was a Green one actually first, jumped in and said, this is discriminatory and offensive. And then a Labour person jumped in, and then the chair, who's also Labour, said, you're being very offensive, and said he'd rather I didn't ask the questions. And then actually a Tory, one of the Tories did jump in.
Oh, did they?
Andrew Boff, he jumped in and sort of supported the Labour and Greens who had tried to close me down. So it was actually Greens, Labour and Tories all acting together to shut me down, to stop me from simply asking a question of the mayor of what did you actually mean by this tweet about transgenderism. But to me, his answers were completely nonsensical.
The thing is, really, it's interesting is that we are in a forum there where supposedly you're meant to be able to ask, and so it shows how the centre of things have shifted, doesn't it? That this was like now an unaskable thing, wasn't it?
It seems to be, that you must accept this. You mustn't even ask questions about this, just simple questions about what does this mean scientifically. So, this has moved on, this sort of agenda. I mean, I'd never heard of transgenderism until about 5 years ago. And when I first heard about it, it was like, well, this doesn't make any sense, but this is a new thing that people are pushing. And now it's almost, you even ask a question and you're accused of being hateful and stirring up hatred. I mean, this is how quickly this political correctness, woke agenda is actually now shutting down freedom of speech. And not just freedom of speech, it's actually undermining reality. We're really in Orwellian territory where, you hold up 2 fingers and they say that's 4 fingers or 5 fingers. And, if you don't say something unreal, then you're going to be punished for it. So
yeah, I mean, this is you say it's a woke agenda, but also it's the same sort of thing in a way, but it's hate crime, isn't it? It's the whole thing behind hate crime. So that would now be, you said stirring up hatred, that would now be considered to be, well, some people could sort of call up and say that I've been victimized, couldn't they? Or they could say this is a hate crime and I've been hurt.
Yeah, right. And this has been coming in gradually over the last 10 years or so. And I don't think that's actually law yet in England, or they did have a review. I think the Law Commission were trying to do a consultation before a bill to make it law in England. But it is in Scotland now with this new hate crime and public order bill that's just come in on the 11th of March in Scotland. So actually now stirring up hatred is now considered a crime. You can get 7 years in prison if someone feels like they're a victim of your words. And it's not that you intended to say something wrong, but if someone feels that you were offensive to a person or a group with a protected characteristic, you can go to prison in Scotland. That isn't the case in England, but I know there's people who want to try to bring this in, and for every kind of thing that they think is offensive. This, one of the worst affected groups of people are comedians, because comedians rely on, just telling jokes, and a lot of their jokes are offensive, but it's the sort of scene you go into, you go there, you have a laugh, you let off steam, you have a bit of banter and something. But this kind of thing is now, they want to close it down. We can't tell jokes anymore. And this, what do you do if you're just in your work and you're having a private conversation, someone overhears you, they think that, oh, I don't like what they said, that's offensive, they can report you to the police. And
what's your, you're going to be selling for, when is the contest actually, David? Let's be clear, it's May the
6th of May.
6th of May.
Thursday, 6th of May.
There are quite a few candidates standing for the mayoralty, aren't there? I don't know quite how many, but quite more than last time. How do you, sorry, I know it's, the usual question, how do you differ from, say, like Lawrence Fox, or who else is standing? Piers Corbyn is standing, and a few other people. I must say I just don't know who they are, but I mean, how would you differ from them? Yeah,
there's 20 people standing this
really?
time. It's extraordinary. I know. Last time there were 12, and that was a record. Now there's 20. Well, I mean, I would certainly differ from most of the candidates, and you can see the policies that we've got out there for the Heritage Party. We've got our sort of general national manifesto of principles. We stand for free speech and liberty. We stand for traditional family values. We stand for low immigration, self-sufficiency and skills, preserving our environment, but not in the sort of way that goes towards this green environmentalist ideology. We would be the opposite to that. So we got that out, and I've been standing as a candidate for over a year, and there's other people have come in since then, like you say, Lawrence Fox and Piers Corbyn, and we got a lot of crossover, between us. I think, sometimes imitation is the best form of flattery, and I think, I like, when Lawrence Fox was on Newsnight, he first sort of came to prominence in this. I mean, I loved what he said. It was fantastic that he was standing up for common sense there on the BBC, and he's getting pilloried for it. Now he's standing as a mayoral candidate. But I think in London, it's unique in London because when you vote for the mayoralty, you get a first preference and a second preference. So you can vote for both of us if you want to, number one and number two. So we would agree on a lot of things. I mean, certainly we're against this woke culture. We are against the lockdown. have been speaking out against the lockdown from the very beginning.
Yes, I'm going to say from pretty much from the start. I mean, when it comes to what would your policy be done? Like people say, well, London is in a real state, and I think I would say that London is. I mean, there was a brief period last week. This is we're doing this on April the 6th. There was a brief period last week when it suddenly seemed to be very, very lively again. Now it's gone again. Maybe it's the cold weather. It's gone. To me, it seems that it's going to be a gargantuan task to get this place up and running. I mean, what is your
There's so much damage that's already been done. You know, I think, you know, the Tory government supported by Labour, they kind of think that the economy is like a light switch. You can switch it off and you can switch it on again. It doesn't work like that. It's almost like a nuclear power station. You can wind it down and decommission it, but you can't just switch it on and it comes back to life. You know, there's so much has been ruined and destroyed, but we've got to get things open immediately, as soon as we can. I mean, so if I'm the mayor, the mayor will be in charge of the Metropolitan Police, and the police are the enforcers of these regulations, which I say are repugnant. I mean, that's a legal term. These regulations are legally repugnant to our human rights and our fundamental freedoms, because we're being denied freedom of assembly, businesses are being denied the freedom to trade, and it's completely disproportionate to the threat that there is. I mean, if you look at the total mortality in 2020, there was a spike in mortality in March and April, but total mortality over the whole year is no different to the 20-year average over the last 20 years. So there is no massive pandemic that's killed many, many more people than normal. It's completely in line with the 20-year average. So all the response and the destruction of our freedoms is completely disproportionate and repugnant. So I think I'll be able to say, you know, I will have a policy of the Metropolitan Police not enforcing the regulations, not closing down churches as we saw on Good Friday. I mean, that
was terrible.
That was diabolical.
That was in the Polish church, wasn't it?
The Polish church in Balham, in South London, where they marched in and threatened people with fines and arrests if they didn't stop their service. This shouldn't be happening in the UK. This is the sort of thing that you'd expect to happen in China, not here. Absolutely despicable. But this is been happening all year. I mean, particularly in London with the Metropolitan Police, has been time and time again. They've gone in really hard to arrest people at freedom rallies, and I was harassed in Richmond the other week just for sitting with a couple of friends on a park bench. They came over and threatened to arrest a friend of mine and threatened to give me a £200 fixed penalty notice if I didn't leave the area. So, really? Just for sitting in a park and talking to someone on a park bench. I mean, this is not what the police should be doing. No. When they're doing this, they're not out catching real criminals. They're supposed to be catching murderers and burglars and thieves and thugs and grooming gangs and so on, and the thuggery that happened in the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer, they didn't do hardly anything about it. And then they're harassing people for going to church. I mean, this is appalling. And the mayor is responsible for policing in London. I've asked Sadiq Khan about this on a number of occasions in the London Assembly, and he doesn't seem to want to take responsibility for it. But I will, and I'm going to make sure that the police do not enforce these kind of regulations which are taking away our freedom.
So basically they would be government regulations, so, this comes to government, but your policy would be actually just ignore.
Yeah. I mean, because the police are, they're strapped for resources. We know that they've said for years and years that...
Although actually, David, it's funny, one thing someone said to me yesterday, it's funny how many of them you're seeing about now. I mean, it's funny, considering that they say, we've been cut, our numbers have been cut, they seem to be remarkably present, at Speaker's Corner.
It's extraordinary, how there can be 200 police turning up at Speaker's Corner for a few dozen people giving a speech and not doing anything wrong. But while they're doing this, people are stabbing each other, out in the boroughs, and they're not attending those things. So they've got to be doing their proper job. If you report a burglary, to the police through 999 or 111. You know, what are the chances that they actually investigate that and actually find the perpetrators of those kind of crimes? I think in some cases it's about a 3%, you know, clear up rate. You know, 97% of burglaries or so on, that's the figure that's in my head, go unsolved. You know, so this is extraordinary.
I think that they actually say quite explicitly, this must be good 2 years ago, that we are going to sort of like not follow up on all sorts of crime. I seem to remember that.
They did, yeah.
But do you think, therefore, I mean, that there is two-tier policing, and do you think the police are political now?
Well, no question there is. We've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes, you know, this year. I've been to so many protests. I mean, I've been to more protests in the last 12 months than I have in my whole life. I never thought I would. But I've been to the freedom rallies, which I've actually been involved in and spoken at, you know, one in September, and I marched on the last one in the 20th of March. But I've also been to observe what's happening at these BLM, Extinction Rebellion. There's the latest one is the Kill the Bill rallies. All seem to be the same kind of people, and you know, they generally go very softly on them. And you know, we've all seen the picture of this young protester burning the flag at the cenotaph, and what happened to them? Not much happened to them for months, and then they basically got a slap on the wrist. You know, nothing happened to them that was going to, you know, be a deterrent to anyone doing the same thing again.
But how would you depoliticize them then? I mean, as mayor, because it's very, very difficult actually often to actually work out what the mayor is responsible for. I mean, because it's a heavily symbolic role as well as, but police is one area, is it not? I mean, how would one go about depoliticising them?
Well, I mean, it will be political in a way, because the whole role of police and crime commissioner in London, the mayor is the police and crime commissioner. It has politicised the police everywhere, whereas before it probably wasn't. You know, it would have been decided by some sort of panel that nobody, you know, really sort of knows the working of. But because you've got party political people now in these roles, it has become a political role. So, I mean, I'm not in favour of that, to be honest. I think that it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time. They cream off, you know, millions of pounds, 1% or 2% of the budget for their own office, and that doesn't go into policing. And you know, the sort of people who are in these roles, they do spend money on political projects, you know, and this is what Sadiq Khans has done. He's all into the sort of woke equality, diversity and inclusion agenda and so on. You know, if I were in that role, I mean, I would just basically scrap a lot of the sort of schemes that he's put in place and get rid of, you know, for example, the hate crime hub that he set up with a budget of nearly £2 million for people, a certain number of police officers to look at people's tweets and, you know, and go and investigate if someone has made an offensive tweet. Just scrap that, use the money for community policing and building liaisons with, you know, the communities where there are high levels of crime. That's what we need to do. So it's just basically getting back to common sense and scrapping the political things that have been put in by the parties. You know, Tory and Labour are pretty much the same these days. The idea that they're different is, you know, that was from a long time ago. The reality is they're all going in the same direction.
Would you say as well that in City Hall, in the London Assembly, the Tories are even more, not exactly like Labour in the sense that there are arguments, of course, but they're even more supine, aren't they, really?
Yeah, I mean, they're a mixed bag, because I know there's one or two that I think privately probably would agree with you and me on a lot of things, but would never say anything publicly. But then there are others that would completely agree with the sort of, you know, the woke direction that the Labour and the Greens and the Lib Dems are going in. So they're a mixed bag, but generally, you know, would tend to agree with them half the time. So, you know, I think you and I have been the only real opposition to that agenda over the last few years.
Do you think, I mean, there is this, before we go on to a few other policy things, there is this view floating around too. It seems like an odd question to ask you, really, but there's this view floating around that the whole thing should be abolished anyway. What do you think about that? You know, that the mayoralty and the assembly, that, you know, frankly, it's more trouble than it's worth.
Well, the thing about the mayor and the assembly in London is the way it's set up. The assembly doesn't have any real power. It's not like the Welsh assembly that's now the Senedd. That's actually more like the Scottish Parliament. It's a real parliament that makes legislation. It's got legislative power. The London Assembly doesn't have hardly any real power. I mean, the only real hard power it's got is to reject the mayor's budget, but it needs a 2/3 majority to do that, so it never can do because of the way it's usually set up. And then you've got the mayor who has complete power over police and crime and transport and the fire and emergency and now adult education. So the budget for that in London too, £400 million. So he can do whatever he wants with no real opposition. I mean, we can talk about it and we can say we don't agree. We can say to the press we don't agree with what he's doing. But he can just basically go, it's one person. It's concentrated. All these things are completely concentrated in the hands of one person. And if you get the wrong person in, as I think we've had, that can be very dangerous and very destructive. So, I don't think it works very well the way it's set up. It is all quite dysfunctional at the moment. I mean, if you were going to set up something like what you've got in Scotland, a parliament, that might, be... I've been thinking about it. I personally, I don't think that London should be separated from the rest of England. I mean, I think that we've got to really look at the sort of devolution of powers again, because all these things were put in place by Tony Blair, and he did that to fall in line with the European Union's vision of like a Europe of the cities and regions. So, setting up Scottish Parliament, London Mayor and Assembly, they also wanted to do the North East Assembly, the South East Assembly and so on. They didn't really take off, but their idea there was to sort of eventually get rid of the UK as a nation and just have, London would be a region of the EU and so on. And so now we're out of the EU, that's no longer relevant, to be honest. So, it's a good question. I don't want to say that because I'm actually standing for the Mayor and Assembly because, I do want to use the position to do some good and to restore some common sense to London. But I do think in the long term, these things are actually, not very helpful to the unity of our nation as a whole, the United Kingdom.
I can sort of see what you mean. The Assembly, it's like a select committee, isn't it? It's scrutinising body, but I suppose it could be more. It could have more power, and maybe then people would listen to it more. Who knows? But as we're talking now, the Sadiq Khans brought his manifesto out, I think, and some of the things, the headline-grabbing things in it, has been, for example, that he's going to set up some new commission on decriminalisation of Class B drugs. Right? This is another commission, a bit like the diversity one. What's your view on that, David? Should they be decriminalised?
I'm not exactly sure if cannabis is Class B or Class C, to be honest. I'm not sure about that. If it's but I mean, if you're talking about,
I think the headline was talking about cannabis.
Right, so it must be.
Yeah.
No, it's we've got these things take time to digest, don't they? But my position on that, I mean, I've said it before. I am all for industrial use of cannabis because it's very useful industrial material. It can make paper, it can make canvas, all these kind of things. I'm all for medical marijuana, which is given out for medical purposes under license. I think that's fine, but I'm not in favour of decriminalising it for recreational use. I mean, I think that I think we got it about right as it is. Sort of the Class A drugs are obviously, criminalised, and so are the Class B drugs and cannabis as well. So medical use I'm fine with, but I don't think it's. I don't think we should change the position we have now for recreational use.
Because it's one of those odd issues that sort of is not particularly left or right. I think there are a lot of people, I think even Nigel Farage at one point said about maybe the time's come to look at decriminalising stuff. I think he was talking about just See, I'm so ignorant of drugs. Sorry, that sounds so kind of naive. But when it comes to dope or whatever, I think he was for that. But so there's that. So you wouldn't go along with that. When it comes to the Commission on Diversity in the Public Realm, which is this very long-winded way of saying get rid of statues, basically. You'd scrap that, would you?
I would scrap it. I think we should have more statues of proper historical figures, British figures. I mean, what I said is, this fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square, where every few years they put up some new ridiculous modern art nonsense. At the moment there's an ice cream cone on it with a fly in the side and a drone. It's absolutely ridiculous. Let's just get rid of that. Put up a statue of William Wilberforce. He's a man to be proud of. The man that ended slavery, began the process of ending slavery in the British Empire. I mean, wonderful man, British man to honour. Let's put a statue of him in Trafalgar Square. And let's put more statues of our wonderful historical figures around London.
So it's interesting, actually, isn't it? Because I don't even think he's got one in London. I mean, actually, Wilberforce.
I think there's a museum dedicated to him in Hull, I think. I think there's a statue there. Yeah.
Did you ever get any particular grief, David, from, because you were very anti-Black Lives Matter, guy you might know called Calvin Robertson, he's a great guy. He got the most shocking, because he's mixed race, and he got the most shocking abuse directed at him for that reason. Because did you ever have any of that?
Oh, I got the same. Yeah, absolutely. I got called Uncle Tom and worse. At the time, I got all that same abuse. I put out I mentioned it on social media. The sort of like list of names that I've been called. Same as Calvin. We've been treated pretty much the same way. But I have no regrets, because BLM, it's not about Black Lives Mattering. It's a Marxist, cultural Marxist organization. What they want to do is defund the police. They want to disrupt the nuclear family and so on. They see the nuclear family as being somehow white supremacist, and they're into removing statues, renaming streets, and decolonizing education, whatever that means. I mean, that means basically not teaching children about Shakespeare, and not teaching children about British history and British art and British culture, which I think is terrible. We should be teaching more British history, art and culture to our students. So everyone living here, of whatever colour or ethnicity, is grounded in British history. If you live here, then you should know this is your country. You should be proud of your country and the good things about your country.
Well, I mean, I'd agree with that. But this is the point, isn't it? That the mayor doesn't have any power over education, but what he or she says is enormously important. I mean, it's a bit like the Prime Minister. When the BLM thing came up last year, people just simply wanted, Boris Johnson just to say this is outrageous, we stand by our just something like that. That's all they needed, really. But they didn't get that. They got this kind of rather weak response to it. I mean, I was thinking particularly, for example, in Pimlico, which is in London. There's this case at the moment of Pimlico Academy, isn't there, the school, which where the kids seem to be actually in a full-scale revolt against. I mean, you're a teacher, aren't you, by profession?
Yeah, but I was a yes,
chemistry
I'm a qualified teacher. Yes.
Yeah. What is your view of that situation that they're facing at the moment?
Well, I think the head teacher was absolutely courageous, because he wanted to bring back in British values. You say British values, what does that actually mean? You've got modern British values, you've got traditional British values. I think he was talking about traditional British values. We wanted to fly the Union flag above the school. He wanted to teach more about British history, so children would have this understanding that had sort of gone through curricula being dumbed down over years and years and years. And I think that there was a revolt. The students
they burned the flag.
Yes. I don't think they did that entirely of their own volition. I think there were probably people going in and agitating them to do that. Yeah, because kids are very impressionable, and if you got sort of leaders going in who are trained, I wouldn't be surprised if it was some of the teachers. I mean, the unions these days, they're so far left, that some of them consider they're activist teachers. That's why they become teachers, because they want to actually inculcate this kind of cultural Marxist ideology into the kids, so that they then destabilize things and they act against the nation. I mean, it's pure wickedness, I think.
Also, I think, didn't they want to as well, there was something about uniforms and hairstyles, and they've really gone to town on this, saying that this is kind of discriminatory, it's racist, I guess. But from what I can gather, the headmaster, who's completely caved, by the way, in all of these areas, it was essentially about such things as, or to an extent, a certain amount of uniformity needed, but the ability to see over a very elaborate hairstyle or something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it was just a practical thing. I don't see that as racist. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I've taught in many different schools in many different countries, and sometimes you have different uniform rules, and they can be the complete opposite in one country or another. I mean, some schools say boys, they can't have short hair because they look like skinheads. Other schools say boys must not have long hair. So you get different kind of rules in different countries and different cultures. But I think here, that just seemed to be something practical. If you're behind another person and their hair is out here or something, you can't see behind them. So I think it's just a practical thing. But then that some people then use that to stir up the false idea this is racist. So then this head teacher's being racist, and he's caved to the mob. And I don't blame him in some ways, because when the mob come for you, and it's never happened before, it's brutal. They try to destroy you. They would be trying to take away his job, kill his reputation. I mean, if they'd been successful, the poor guy, this is almost like his cultural warfare. They want to get rid of him, and the only job he'd ever have in the future would be as a cleaner or something. He'd never work in education again. But we need to come together and stand up against this, and not cave in and capitulate. But I don't know, I can't say, for this headmaster in Pimlico, what he was going through personally would probably be
terrible,
absolutely awful. But he made a brave stand, and he's a man down, but he fought the fight for a while.
That is the sort of thing where I suppose the mayor is in a position the mayor could offer supportive. Of
course.
You could say, this is where I stand.
I'd go and visit him. I'd have my photo taken with him and say, this man is doing a wonderful thing,
Yes.
And honour him and respect him. I'd support him 100%.
Because that's where the power of the multi is, isn't it, really? Would you ever want to be a teacher again, for example, in this sort of environment, or
I think I've done my time teaching. I had a great time. That's nearly 20 years teaching, but it would be so tough to go back into the school. I don't know if I'd get a job in all the things that I've said in the London Assembly over the last 5 years. I think they'd look at me and I'd be straight out. My CV would be in the bin in 2 seconds. So I can't see that happening, to be honest. But there you go. That's just I joke, but that's the reality of the situation, isn't it? So but I'd love to do more in politics. I've enjoyed it, and I think we've done some great things in the London Assembly, and I think we've been speaking out for just common sense. Nothing that people wouldn't say was just normal common sense 30 years ago. And it's all been swept away by absolute lunacy.
Very, very quickly.
Yes,
very, very far. What would? Where should people go? Because what happens is, after we have these interviews, we get a lot of comments, and then some emails and things, and people say, "Well, I'd like to help such and such, or I'd like to do this." What should they do with you, David? Where should they go if they say, "Oh, I want to help David?
Yeah, fantastic. There's two things. So there's the Heritage Party. We've got our party website, heritageparty.org. And you can join there, you can volunteer there, you can donate there. Our manifesto's there too, like our general manifesto of principles. And then I've got my own personal website, davidkurten.net. And that's had a bit of a revamp. So it's all about the London Mayor. It's got my policies for London on the front page, and so you can see more about my
and there's
London
a way of
campaign
sort of
there.
like for them to say, I'd like to get involved or help out or something like that.
That's right. There's a contact form you can fill in, and it just goes to my email, so you can do that. Yeah.
And you've got basically about a month left to go.
It really is. It's about, I think today, it's 30 days today. No, sorry. It's about a month. It's about a month to go. I realise when this goes out, it might be different. I forgot for a moment then. It's about a month to go, absolutely. 6th of May.
Well, all the very best, David, and keep on trucking. And well, maybe we'll see you again later on in the year. Oh, by the way, I should add, you're standing for the Assembly too, aren't you?
I am, yeah. So the Heritage Party is standing for the Assembly. So that, I think we're the only real party that is against the wokeness and the lockdown in the Assembly. So that would be really good to look at us.
Thanks very much, David, for coming in. Thanks
really
very much.
Nice to see you again, Peter.
There you go. That was nice. Anyway, look forward to seeing you again next time. In the meantime, please do remember, I want you to subscribe, and we shall see you again on the show next time. Thank you. Bye.